series of presentations in today's symposium. Thanks to all of you for being here. I'm Kim Tanzer, Dean of the School of Architecture, and very pleased to host all of you and to host this conference on behalf of my colleagues. We'll have three speakers in this last series talking about healing spaces in different ways. And I just thought I would remark that whereas a lot of the discussion that we've had today has to do with what I think of as the intersection between idea and physicality at a very small level, where an idea becomes a manifestation in a human being, I think that perhaps the way our discipline works, the discipline of architecture, is starting at the scale of the large and somehow hoping to make some impact on what ultimately becomes an idea of health through the intermediate medium of the human body. So we're going to have three speakers today who will talk about this process in different ways, and I'll introduce them all at the beginning so that the presentations might flow together a little bit better. Our first speaker will be Phoebe Crisman. She's an associate professor of architecture and also our associate dean for research and international engagement here at the School of Architecture. Her work has focused on activist practices, and in recent years she has been working with our second speaker, Peter Waldman, to develop a program in India, which is very exciting for us because it allows our students to work in a totally new context in all sorts of ways. Our second speaker is Peter Waldman. He is the Keenan Professor of Architecture. He's been teaching here at UVA for several decades, and for the last decade has taught a very important and popular course for us called Lessons on the Lawn, among many other things, in which he reinterprets Mr. Jefferson's academical village through, as you'll see, a kind of a cosmic lens of architecture. I often think of Peter as the magus among us, and I suspect you'll see a bit of that today. Our third speaker is Ruben Rainey, who is the Whedon Professor Emeritus in landscape architecture. The Whedon Professorship is focused on Asian architecture, and among all of my very accomplished colleagues, I would say he has the most wide-ranging series of degrees and perspectives that he brings to the study of landscape architecture. His first degree was in, I think, comparative religion, followed by a degree in divinity, a PhD in comparative religion from Columbia University, and then he started studying landscape architecture. He's taught at the University of Virginia for a number of years, although he did make a brief foray to Southern California where he became a professional filmmaker. And I joke that if all professors retired as Ruben has, we would have no financial problems at the University of Virginia, because he's one of our most productive faculty members in his near retirement. Although he's not completely retired, he is the co-director of our new Center for Design and Health, along with Tim Beatley. And Ruben brings a perspective on healing that has to do with human beings' embodiment in particularly healthcare settings and also in gardens, and I think he'll be talking about that today. So our first speaker this afternoon will be Phoebe Crisman.
Good afternoon. Is that all right? Thank you for staying with us. This has been a really wonderful day, and I'd like to thank the conference organizers for inviting me to participate. So I've been given the task of speaking first about the issue of the kind of constructed environment and how it relates to the topic of today's conference, where we're considering issues such as contemplation or care or well-being. And the way that I would like to address this is really through a series of case studies, both historical and contemporary examples of architecture drawn from the Buddhist, Hindu traditions, as well as other wisdom traditions, to talk about this. And of course, as all good architects, I'm going to have a lot of images to help me. So I encourage you to think about the relationship between the image and the words as crucial. And sometimes I won't specifically refer to the images, but they're very much a part of my argument. I guess I should also say that a few of my examples are secular spaces as well, which achieve spaces which promote contemplation. And I'm actually thinking, if I turn these lights a little bit lower, will everyone fall asleep? just a tiny bit. Oh, well, that's too dark. Sorry. No. I guess it's either this or that. What do you think? Too dark. Okay. Okay. Mysterious? Sure, let's go for full dark. Okay. Oh, now it's not doing it. Okay. This will be exciting. Okay, so I'd like to begin with a quote. And I guess someone didn't like that idea.
Somebody's working on it to get it. Yeah, I'm trying to get the midlight on so I can.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, I'm not going to worry about the lights. Okay, so I'd like to begin with a quote from an architectural theorist whose work I'm very interested in, Ioannis Palasma, as a way to frame my talk and also to frame the kind of whole issue of architecture for those of you in the room who maybe don't think a lot about this topic. So the quote is, the real purpose of architecture is not to create aestheticized objects or spaces, but to provide frames, horizons, and settings for experiencing and understanding the world and finally ourselves. So the kind of architecture I'm talking about here is not engineering or construction as much as the actual embodied reality of living in these spaces. Although the inward focus of meditative practices might suggest an undervaluation of the built environment, I'm arguing that the human experience of places of contemplation is affected by specific spatial, formal, and material qualities of the architecture. So in this way, my use of the word contemplation refers to insight contemplation or to paying attention and reflective states, and is considered to contribute more to psychological, intellectual, and spiritual development, rather than the kind of calming contemplation which might be seeking to eliminate thought. Research from several disciplines, much of what we've heard today, support both claims that contemplation and mindfulness practice can be powerful forces that positively influence human health, and that designed environments can help to relieve the stress of contemporary life. Thus, my presentation will focus on how architecture itself can be designed to benefit contemplation and health. And so I'm not going to focus on building up that argument because it's one that, and I have bibliographies if you're interested, but I'm taking that, accepting that at this point. So I'd like to propose 3 questions to ponder as we proceed. First, what is the power of place in shaping contemplative experience? And we had a question about that earlier today. Second, where may contemplation be achieved in the natural and constructed environment? And what design strategies may connect us with self, community, and the vastness of the world? Contemplation has been cultivated in a wide range of wisdom traditions globally. The history of architecture physically manifests diverse intentions for inspiring particular types of contemplation and for constructing connections between the individual, community, nature, or God. So I'd like to explore a few themes today. These are not universal principles, but certainly shared conditions that pervade many places around the world. And I'll use examples to elucidate concepts of interiority, of the role of light and framing, of heightened and reduced tactile, oral, and visual qualities, and the role of place and a search for the transcendent. It was interesting, this morning our first speaker was talking about an ancient description of finding a suitable place for meditation, and he described it as a place that was both beautiful and off the beaten path. And it's interesting because that, for me, is right away about this issue of interiority. So the term interiority is one that's important because often contemplation is sought to be induced through the inward orientation of a space. If we think about earlier rock-cut temples, for instance, I'm a little off my cycle here. Sorry. Oh, here we go. Sorry. If we think about, well, actually, let me go back for a minute. I want to say something more about this. Okay. So in addition to architecture specifically designed to support contemplation or religious rituals, several of my examples are powerful secular places that seek to disrupt habitual thought and deepen awareness
such as this project, which is a thermal bath in Switzerland. So these exceptional environments go beyond supporting human need to fulfill our emotional, intellectual, and spiritual aspirations, and to foster individual and communal contemplation. As we've heard today, heightened awareness is dormant for many. Our senses are bombarded with relentless and often aggressive media images, over-present ambient traffic noise, and uniformly lit fluorescent spaces, such as this room, by the way, that disconnect us from the diurnal cycle. Our homes, offices, and gathering places need not be this way. Architecture may ameliorate these conditions and increase awareness. The Swiss architect Le Corbusier explained his intentions for a pilgrimage chapel that he designed at Ronchamp in this way. And this is the chapel that you see. I wanted to create a place of silence, of prayer, of peace, and of internal joy. And I would argue that his words ring true for many spaces of contemplation around the world. In the essay on the transcendent in landscapes of contemplation, historian Heinrich Herrmann discusses 3 paradigms for how a contemplative state may be elicited by an environment. Each paradigm describes how a sanctuary is created with differing relationships between what he terms natural and created space. For him, created space is human-built space. So first he begins with his first paradigm is discussing a balanced, natural, and created sanctuary, such as this one, which facilitates a perceptual linkage between the human and the cosmos. So here we see an example of the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California, where a very strong geometric form of these research laboratories define a central courtyard, which then ends in a view, a kind of infinite view of the Pacific Ocean. The second paradigm is an inwardly focused built space, which is shaped into a created kind of sanctuary. So here you see an Indian Hindu temple from 1121, or a Jain temple in Ranakpur, both of which very much work with this idea of interiority. Or third, a natural sanctuary that employs archetypal cultural symbols, such as this Christian cross at the Woodland Cemetery in Sweden, or we could think of the Buddhist stupa at Sanchi in India, or perhaps a simple Hindu shrine along the roadside in a rural Indian landscape. Today, I'd like to focus in the time I have on just 2 of these paradigms, and to do so through the lens of the bodily senses. So I'll begin with this idea of interiority. So contemplation may be induced beyond the religious program through the inward orientation of the space. Here's an example. I'm going to mix it up in terms of my examples, but this is an early series of early Buddhist rock-cut cave sanctuaries in Ajanta, where, for me, it's one of the best examples of interiority. We see a minimal exterior presence of the space itself, and an interior volume that's literally created through the subtraction of the rock cliff. Hindu temples, much such as this temple, the Meenakshi Sundasvara temple in Madurai, are oases in the midst of a bustling city. And in this case, we see that interiority is intensified both at the urban and architectural scale. So, I have a pointer. The temple itself is sitting within this dense kind of medieval fabric of the city of Madurai, and we see a series of temple gates, of multiple sub-temples within this larger precinct. So it's an urban oasis as well as then each temple functioning on its own level. By reducing distracting stimuli, a kind of disconnection occurs, bringing visitors to remove themselves from their daily routines, and in some cases, and not always, introduces a state of contemplation. This Jain temple at Ranakpur possesses a powerful interiority while carefully framing the world beyond. So one is always very aware of being within something, but never really disconnected from the larger world. When you look at that kind of space from the outside, there's a kind of fortress-like exterior that shelters this light-infused sanctuary within. Some contemplative spaces intentionally heighten particular visual, tactile, or aural qualities to connect one with the natural world. In the case of Ranakpur, the white marble surfaces are highly articulated through the kind of elaborate carving of nearly every surface. And at least for me, at this temple, there's a kind of intense but calming tactility that pervades my experience of this space. If we leave India for a moment, look at an example of this Buddhist hall at Toryuji in Japan, another internalized space of columns and beams with a consistent material palette, this time a palette of rich wood rather than stone. We see that the kind of translucent shoji screens along the perimeter of the space increases the interior focus by mysteriously illuminating the inside and denying an exterior view. Now, I wanted to look at some current examples of contemplative spaces that often use the same methods that we see from these ancient and older examples. Here's an example of the Zen, a center of Zen, the Center of Gravity Hall, which is part of the Bodhi Mandala Zen Center in New Mexico. This was built in 2003. So while using kind of modern long span wood construction, this new prayer hall employs very similar strategies for kind of quieting the space. So we see interiority reinforced with minimal material types, with a kind of geometric clarity, with luminous enclosing walls, and a central focus on the shrine. If we look at the exterior of this building, we see the kind of broad eaves and natural materials, round earth and wood and metal, and a kind of rhythmic articulation that is in many ways a modern day translation of a traditional Japanese Buddhist temple form in New Mexico. Another recent example is an interfaith spiritual center at Northeastern University. And in this case, a kind of glowing, continuous enclosure creates a calming effect in this space by completely disconnecting one from the outside world. And the banal building in which this is housed, this is a very strange thing. It's within a typical university building like this one, and you open a door, and then all of a sudden you're in this a pretty amazing space of contemplation. There's a 3D, a series of 3 metal suspended domes that modulate light in this space and change orientation so that the space can be reconfigured to support different kinds of ritual practices. I'm showing you these contemporary examples because I think it's interesting to see how there are certain strategies that are effective over time. One of the most interesting examples that I can think of in terms of a recent Buddhist temple or chapel is this one near Kyoto called the White Temple. And in this case, materiality and tactility is reduced to the absolute minimum, while really relying on natural light and its constant changeability to enrich the space. This is a temple for honoring maternal ancestors, which is not a typical condition. There are Buddhist mortuary tablets that are inscribed with the names of female ancestors and housed in this temple. It's really just a very simple white rectangular volume with a central focus on the Buddha statue. So the top image is what one would see entering through the door on the bottom, and then turning around and looking back out and seeing this amazing frame view of nature beyond. You can imagine being in that space, which is completely top-lit, day-lit from above, and how the changing light conditions over the day, the course of a day or the year would radically transform that space and its colors. And I wanted to read a quote from the architect, because I think it's pretty interesting in the way that he was thinking about his intentions for the design. The architect is Yakashi Yamaguchi. And he explained that it was designed to orchestrate a kind of floating sensation like being in the womb, because it was this meant to honor maternal ancestors. And he says, into this atmosphere then, I introduced the movement of time. The light inside the building grows lighter or darker, along with the changing brightness of the sky, so that the space seems to breathe. We've heard a lot about breath today, and this is a breathing building. With each change in the intensity of the light, in other words, the space seems to swell or shrink. This swelling and shrinking, which is like the motion inside the womb, envelops people in a soft way. The space's geometric position and size are fixed, of course, but the apparent size and position of the space changes dramatically along with these changes in the density of light. In this way, the interior space obtains connection with heaven, and this world joins the distant shore. End quote. It's interesting, Yamaguchi designs a lot of contemporary Buddhist temples and other kinds of buildings in Japan, and he describes his work as his research as a contemplation about the acceleration and the speed of the transformation of architecture in modern ages. And he's done a number of chapels. Here's one that again looks at this concept of material clarity. It's called the Glass Temple, completely built of glass and steel. And here he works with the transcendent qualities of light. This is located adjacent to an imperial temple from 1638 near Kyoto. So of course there are some real demands about how one builds in that kind of precinct. And what he's decided to do is move the temple below ground to create a completely submerged space, an introspective space, but completely lit from above. On the left is an oculus which connects earth and sky to that subterranean space, and also enframes the constantly changing conditions above, and we can of course understand how that connects to Buddhist principles. In comparison, I'm just showing you some examples to kind of give you an overview. This is a glass pavilion, a private meditation chapel at a private residence in London, which is almost the reversal. Here we see that the walls are really dematerialized to break down the sense of interiority, which I've been advocating for, and to provide uninterrupted views of the garden, which then essentially become the enclosure of this space, while the connection to the sky is very much denied, and we see a kind of heavy sky plane. So in this case, there's a really intense union between the natural, it's a constructed garden, but I'll call it natural for now, and the constructed world to create this kind of sanctuary. I think Professor Waldman will talk about this in more detail, but I wanted to bring up the issue of apertures, for instance, the importance of the oculus in this project, or how, in terms of how we carefully frame the relationship of the exterior world to the inhabitant within. And this, of course, for architects is a major focus of our work, is really thinking about those aperture conditions, the threshold between inside and outside. When we think about the influence of South Asian wisdom traditions and on the architecture of that place, we couldn't forget the jali, or the carved stone screen, which we see as a result of largely Islamic occupation of the Indian subcontinent. This is a case where we can take a very solid wall, a masonry wall, and dematerialize it in order to bring in both air, but also for a filtered and controlled kind of connection to the outside world. Now, certainly while prevalent in Mughal and Rajput architecture, these evocative qualities of the jali or the carved screens can be found in contemporary places as well. I found this image, actually want to go there this summer, in Delhi, of a hotel which has a pretty amazing contemplative quality. And of course, these things don't contain themselves to India, but here's an example of a project in Cologne, Germany, called the Colombo Museum by Peter Zumthor, where he again works with this idea of this kind of luminous and liminal condition between inside and outside. We won't talk specifically about museums today, but certainly one might think of some museums as a type of contemplative space as well. Earlier, there was a question that related to the role of aesthetics and kind of art experience, and that would be an interesting discussion if we had more time. I think as we've seen from these examples, every distinct space and place has its characteristic light, and it's often the quality of that light that most directly conditions our mood in that space. So think how differently it felt when we turned the lights off. At least for me, it was a sort of, a sort of transformative moment. It felt like we were really in a different room. And how it supports our ability to contemplate. Natural light breathes light into architecture and connects the material world with cosmic dimensions. We probably all know an image like this of the Pantheon in Rome, and the role of dynamic light as an axis mundi that is created within this massive dome. So in this way, architecture also becomes a datum for reflecting the cyclical nature of time and the changeability of time. So a beam of light, isolated within an architectural space, lingers on the surface of objects and evokes shadows from the background. As light intensity varies with the shifting of time and the changes of season, the appearance of objects and spaces themselves are altered. Here I'm just going to show you a few images of another modern architect, Tadao Ando, who designs many religious buildings, Buddhist temples in Japan, and also secular work. This is actually a house called the Kashino House. which works very much with the idea of constantly changing light on strong geometric surfaces. And I would just want to read a quote from Ando. He describes his intentions for the house in this way. My aim is to limit materials, simplify expression to the maximum, eliminate all non-essentials, and in the process, interweave in my spaces the totality of the human being. And he relates this to Zen Buddhist thought, and he explains that in Zen Buddhism, the space is said to come from being at the boundary, where material things vanish. A person sitting silently and contemplative in such a space has the feeling of experiencing limitless size within the interplay of light and dark. And so when you look at his architecture, it's very sparse and very much about that constant interplay of light. And I'm going to just give one brief example, which Professor Rainey may talk about, of the Japanese dry landscape. The historian Mark Tribe talks about Japanese dry landscape, sometimes described as Zen gardens, as presenting new forms or features or relationships between them upon which to attend. He talks about how a kind of visual exhaustion sets in, that in time one may indeed find infinity within the garden's bounded space, or one may simply close one's eyes and exchange things physical for those metaphysical. So in this way, contemplation is induced through the juxtaposition of finite human life and nature as an infinite force, with its serene beauty and scale beyond human control. So this dialogue, this constant dialogue between the built and the natural, is an important opportunity for design, even if, of course, the natural is not typically untamed nature, but a constructed nature, where we often are relying on things like the poetry of light and shadow. And then I just want to end, I guess, with, for a moment, the idea of the aural and what sound might mean to spaces of contemplation. And certainly a dampening of aural stimuli is another strategy for constructing contemplative space. The quietness of a walled garden or a deep stairwell helps us to be, this is a deep stepwell, this is a stepwell in India, helps us to be fully present. For instance, the thermal bath at Valls heightens the senses as a means to reach the mind. And the architect, in this case, Swiss architect Peter Zumthor, explains his intentions for this kind of space, and I want to use his words. Right from the start, there was a feeling for the mystical nature of the world of stone inside the mountain, for darkness and light, for the different sounds that water makes in stone surroundings. So these intentions together generate strong emotional, cognitive, and physical response in the inhabitants. So I guess I'd like you to just think for a moment about interiors as kind of large instruments, collecting sound, amplifying it, transmitting it elsewhere. And it has to do, of course, with the particular shape of the room. I mean, we're using a microphone, so we're kind of subverting that condition here. And with the surfaces of the materials that define that space and how they've been applied. So when you look at a space like this thermal bath, I think you can imagine with your eyes the kind of aural qualities that would exist there, the kind of, the nature of that volume and how it would be supportive of a kind of interiority and contemplation. Or also specific thermal conditions, so that temperature in this way is physical but also psychological too. Think about looking at a cold surface even though you haven't touched it, or the kind of impasto on a painting where you know that if you touched it would be rough, but of course we're not allowed to touch. So environments that maximize detrimental stimuli may offer a kind of outer silence that can slow the mind and the corresponding inner silence. So many Hindu temples offer just the opposite, a kind of heightened auditory experience with chanting, ringing of bells, all types of sounds and smells, and animals as well. And then scent, I'll just end on this one. It's the final sense that I don't really have time to pursue, but certainly along with incense, candles, and flowers contained within, spaces themselves have particular smells related to their materiality and form, the way a smell is contained within a space or not. So I hope that these words and images together have helped to explain how specific design strategies can heighten or quiet the senses in constructed space to support contemplation and well-being. And I'd like to just end with one more quote from Yanni Palasma. The architectural experience is not just a visual or sensorial encounter. A great work engages our entire being, altering our existential sense, our very sense of self, changing both the world and us. Thank you.